Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Richard Breakiron. He's the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Americas Public Sector at Commvault. David Rubel is Head of U.S. Federal Business Development for AWS Storage at Amazon Web Services. And Kevin Cronin, the co-founder and president of Kelyn Technologies. Gentlemen, good to have you with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our topic is data in the cloud. And maybe set the scene for us, and we'll start with you, Richard, with the idea of securing and protecting data like you would in your data center when that data is in the cloud.
Super. Hey, I appreciate that, and thank you again for having us here today. Real quickly, data today, it is all about the data. That is the lifeblood in today's digital world. But more importantly, when you have data in the cloud, you need to sort of think of it, the best analogy I give is, think about when you visit a hotel. You get there, you feel secure, they have somebody checking you in, you get a little key, your room feels secure. And that is very, very true, and it is a true capability. But in reality, if you lose your laptop, your phone, your clothes, that is still your responsibility, and that's part of the agreement. The hotel says, I don't know what the value of your laptop is. I don't know the value of the data, most importantly, on that laptop. And so it's very important as you enter into any type of agreement, again, you get hotel, rental car, or the cloud, that you have a really strong SLA. What is that agreement about? And understand that there's a shared responsibility. The cloud provider is absolutely protecting you in so many great ways, more efficient, more effective, but you still maintain responsibility under a shared responsibility model. And I know both David and Kevin have a lot to add to that.
Yeah, so shared responsibility, David, means that nobody owns it, but yet somebody has to be responsible. So how does it work in practice?
Yes, and also thank you for having us today. The shared responsibility model that Richard is referring to is basically where the infrastructure, the cloud provider, in the case of AWS, we're responsible for the infrastructure security itself, the maintenance of the system, the storage, all the patching, and so on. But the customer and the customer's data that's resident inside of that infrastructure, they're responsible for the security and the security posture of that data as well. So in the shared responsibility model, there's aspects that both parties are responsible for. Anything that the customer brings into the cloud environment in terms of managing their own encryption is a good example. They bring that environment with their data, so the AWS infrastructure doesn't have any visibility into that data, nor any visibility in terms of the encryption that they're using. It's their data on our infrastructure.
Right, so maybe a good analogy to continue with the hotel idea is often there's a little safe that you set your own password for the duration of your stay in that room.
Yes.
And nobody else can get into that safe, and so that's where you put your jewelry and your wallet when you go down
analogy.
for breakfast. Fair
Great
way
analogy.
to put it?
Great
analogy.
All right, Kevin?
Yeah, and I think one of the really important things to remember here is we all get focused. Cybersecurity is it's a huge industry. It's a very important industry. What is it that they're protecting? What is cybersecurity protecting? It's the data, right? The whole industry is geared towards protection, and sometimes you get that narrow focus of I got to protect. You got to step back and think, okay, what am I protecting? And the crown jewel is the data.
All right, and so how does that work technically? Say you have cybersecurity protections on your data that you would have in your data center. Can you kind of inject that to your space in the cloud?
So some of them you can. It's very easy to bring the access control. So when you're in a government agency, you have a CAC card to even get onto the network to get to the cloud. You're gonna have that same cybersecurity and that same identity control management. That's a front end of it. But when you get into the cloud, you also then find that the cloud provider, an MSP provider, or an OEM like Commvault, they bring a capability to show how you can manage the role and access. You can give attribute access. You can control access with automation at scale. that you probably did not have when you were on your on-prem. You might have had pieces of it, but when you talk about cloud, what I love about cloud, and everybody loves about cloud, is global access. I can reach this from the tactical edge all the way back into Washington, D.C. downtown. And that ability requires you to bring the cyber resiliency of control access, encryption for protection, and there are bits and pieces everywhere. Again, it's that shared responsibility model that continues as you go to the cloud.
Right, it sounds like there's almost an inherited model, maybe for lack of a better word. The attributes that you would have in your own data center get transferred to the cloud and inherited there, even though it might be a separate instance of that data.
Some of them. There's some. It's an interesting dynamic when you start looking at this, because Amazon does give you some tools that are inherent in, they call them cloud native tools, right? Yep. And they're there, and they're there ready for you, willing, able, and then there's some things that you need to bring yourself, and so that's where you need to take a step back, evaluate your requirements, right? What do I have on-prem? What's in the cloud? What capabilities exist in the cloud? And then you merge the two together, and you come up with the best breed solution.
Yeah, David, it reminds me almost like the mass customization idea. If anyone ever bought a car in the 1970s, they would have 10 pages of things you could, which wheel cover, which piece of trim. That all went away. Now there's 3 or 4 basic packages, that you can add to the car, and that's pretty much it. It's custom, but not the way it was, decades ago. In the case of the cloud, you have really long catalogs of services. So there must be a process by which you would work with a large customer like a federal agency and say, here's what you should really have from our catalog, but here's what you can bring to this that complements what we have. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes, it is. And in addition to operating and offering those services in standard commercial regions, as well as GovCloud and restricted access regions through different classifications, each one of those environments have security controls, what Kevin was referring to earlier, security capabilities that are available to an agency to be able to customize to their needs. Creating an environment where not only their data is secure based on how it's being stored and used within the AWS environment, but also then elevating their security posture in terms of how they're managing that data in the cloud environment. So again, it kind of comes back to helping people understand what security means at different levels, the cyber piece, and then the data protection piece, the security of the data itself, and then effectively the sharing of data and making it available for applications and other uses within the cloud environment.
And it's a little subtle distinction. Maybe you can help us, help people thinking about this understand this a little bit better. You have the SLA, that's your service level agreement and what you expect from the cloud, but that's not precisely the same as the sum of all the catalog items you're buying in addition to the storage basic capability, the services we just mentioned. How do you make sure that the SLA reflects what it is that's in the catalog items you've chosen to buy?
So another great point. The SLA can be associated with different aspects of the experience in the cloud. Majority of it has to do with the infrastructure and the services that have kind of availability metrics associated with that SLA. Storage is a good example of that, where it's the AWS infrastructure is built so that storage is durable and it can be replicated between availability zones and between regions, so to make it even more durable. 11 nines of durability in that case. That is a great example of a contributor, significant contributor to the infrastructure side of an SLA. Now those services that ride above it, and whatever services a customer decides to use, a federal agency decides to use, that would align to that SLA from the infrastructure side. But again, agencies can make their services that ride and are leveraged in the AWS infrastructure as capable as they need to be. They can have them replicated, they can have them duplicated. The global access point is an important point that Richard mentioned. And then being able to access those services regardless of where you are in the world is really key, and where you are in the cloud continuum.
And when you mentioned durability, and then we'll
Yeah,
answer
sure.
that question, that sounds a little bit like portability, but it's not really visible necessarily to the customer. If it's durable, it can be in this environment or that environment, depending on my geographic needs or security needs, but I don't really care because I have a global access point.
And it's key, so durability from a data protection perspective. So in the case of Amazon Simple Storage Service S3, when you move data into that environment, into the S3 storage environment, it's automatically replicated into other places within the infrastructure.
Got it.
So the durability, if there is an issue with one of the availability zones, one of the data centers, that data is already present in other locations. We also give the ability to have that data replicated to another region and even cross-region to make it even more durable. That's just one example of a service in that high durability model.
Okay.
And then when you integrate capabilities like Kevin with Kelyn and MSP, and then again, Commvault, complementing all of this is to say, okay, I now have a major requirement for the federal government of an air gap solution, as an example. Let us go ahead and figure that out. But notice we can do that within the same context of the cloud. So not only does Amazon have S3, but they have tiered storages all the way up to their glacier level, which is that deep archive. And notice, again, for every agency, federal and even commercial, it's always a balance of what can the budget afford. And you want to logically say, okay, 90-day or a data that's been 90-day or less, data is temporal and value. Hey, let me put that where I need to get to it quickly. But data that is like over a year old, maybe 3 years old, maybe I can put that in a tiered storage where eventually I'm going to hand it off to NARA, to the National Archives. But I want to make sure that I've got that at a price point that is most valuable. And again, this is where a cloud, I don't have to build it. AWS figured it out for me. An MSP figured out, okay, how do I set up the automated rules within the context of the framework of the application services? So it all works really well. It's a very scalable capability, especially if you work with solution providers that have gone down the road before. They've sort of learned from hard knocks, so you don't have to redo it.
Yeah, and Richard's pointing to an important point here as it pertains to data management. So in data management, there's different aspects that need to be considered here. With Kelyn and with Commvault, being able to look at the data management objective holistically. There's a data protection aspect. There's a backup, a disaster recovery or a COOP aspect to that, being able to protect data and have data in multiple locations in the case of a full restore, in the case of ransomware attacks, things like that, where data needs to be completely restored. So these are all considerations in modern data management strategies.
Right, so the objectives are the same as they were in the mainframe days, tiered storage, never losing any data, but a whole different architecture then, Kevin, for getting to those age-old requirements.
Yeah, the requirements stay the same, right? You still need access to your data, and you know, you brought up ransomware attacks. Well, they don't typically nowadays. They don't just happen once. It's not an act. It's an act, and then penetration, and then you've got a time continuum, right? So some of this data may have been compromised at one point in time, and then the sneaky guys get in and they another point in time attack some other piece of data. And what you need is the ability to restore data at different times, and it's really driving, you know, additional needs for organizations to track that and to be able to put things back into place from a particular point in time.
And by the way, that glacial type of storage, which is not to be dismissed just because it's glacial and might be old data. I mean, in the old days, someone might have to physically mount a disk pack or take an optical disk out of a library. They have these complicated machinery that would flip disks on jukeboxes and so on. How does it work in reality nowadays? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, so Richard mentioned in the case of S3, Amazon S3, there are 6 storage classes, and it varies depending upon the usage pattern of that data. From standard tier, where it's basically active data that's live, hot data, if you will, the whole way to cold.
It's in RAM. So.
Yeah, the whole way to cold, which is glacier and deep glacier in the case of S3 terms in those classes. We also have a class called intelligent tiering that if you don't know your data access patterns, will, through a data lifecycle policy, move that data on your behalf to the most cost-effective storage tier. So it's not only efficiency and usage patterns of that data, but also cost management associated. So you're getting the most cost-effective use for that storage as well.
So
I was just wondering
David alludes to a point that I think we need to think about. With the cloud, you get metadata. And this is what, in fact, is what's being created, because he's using AI and machine learning, AWS is, or any other automated. And the way they're doing that, though, is because there are data tags that are associated with data as it comes back and forth. So that one of the neat pieces about our new technology is, I know when Tom last talked to this file. I know he didn't talk to it for a long time, so odds are he could wait 30 seconds rather than having 0.3 milliseconds response time when he hits to see the file. If you give that type of understanding of that tagging piece, you really do start to see how you get that effectiveness and efficiency over time. And this is the part that we continue to emphasize and show. But again, I will also say there are people, process, technology. You have to have people that really understand and be able to leverage, and you need people that can train other people too. And again, you need the experts. I think that really helped out. Again, an MSP partnership with a major cloud provider. They have an automation tool, and they sort of tie it together in a solution. Because remember, that's what the government wants. They sort of want a solution. They don't want, oh, I figured out this piece on how to turn the car on. Okay, now how do I put it into drive? Now how do I do this? They want the car not to be brought to me in form of tires, engine, and they want an assembled car. So
that's what happens when you rent an electric car the first time. How do I make it go?
But Richard makes a great point. It's the outcome they're looking for. Right? The agencies are looking for a capability and an outcome, and they need help.
Any examples you can give us of this actually working in real life?
Yeah, so we've got customers today that have on-premise data. They have a need and a desire to do things more efficiently, and we've helped them with the use of Commvault software. We've got people on site, operating technology, helping the customer move data in a secure fashion, encrypted across the wire, and putting it into AWS, for backup purposes. And what's neat about the technology is now we've moved the data, which again is the crown jewel, but now you have recoverability both on premise and in the cloud, and you have the ability to stand up and move infrastructure if you'd like to. Since the data is in the cloud, it's a lot easier to move or to bring the capabilities online once the data is there. Data is the heavy lift.
Yeah, and I can give you a real clear example that we worked with as a team, going into Army data centers, looking on their center and taking the capability in with support help, scanning and say, 50% of your data has not been talked to in over 3 years, and yet you're keeping it on primary storage on-prem. You could have a much better solution, more cost-effective. And then, oh, by the way, 20% of that data is what we would call dead data, orphan data. And again, a tool found that data through tagging and looking at it, scanning it. So before you go to the cloud, don't move data that you can't talk to. Don't just lift it. And if you do go to the cloud, give AWS a heads up. Hey, 50% of this data is is 3 years old. Maybe you can help us on the tiering at the outset. Wouldn't you agree, David?
I agree. Yeah, and it kind of goes back to my earlier comment around modern and proactive data management. The tools that are available now through these solutions are incredible in that machine learning can be leveraged to make some of those key pattern predictions, but also look at the actual metadata associated with that particular aspect or that particular application and what that data is being used for and how often it's being used. So the key is efficiency and effectiveness, but also understanding how that data is being used so that, again, it can be managed appropriately.
All right, so time to retire that tape library.
Absolutely. A long time ago.
All right.
We can make it cost effective for you.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank today's guests for a great discussion. Richard Breakiron is the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Americas Public Sector at Commvault. David Rubel is the Head of U.S. Federal Business Development for AWS Storage at Amazon Web Services. And Kevin Cronin is the co-founder and president of Kelyn Technologies. I'm Federal Drive host Tom Temin. You're watching Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on the Industry Exchange Cloud.